Hey there and welcome back to another What If review. And today we'll be talking about the latest episode to drop, What If T'Challa Became a Star-Lord? And after last week's episode, which I found to be pretty great, even if I did think there were some minor problems with it, I was wondering whether Marvel could repeat the success and produce something just as good. And then they went and produced something even better, which I did not expect to happen. At first, the concept sounds a bit weird. T'Challa in space. And honestly, the storyline itself really isn't all that much to write home about. It's just T'Challa and the Ravagers take down a galactic criminal empire. Nothing new or groundbreaking or anything like that. But rather, it was the way they used the characters that really made the episode itself great. There were so many different classic characters reimagined in various different ways that spawned off of one point of divergence. And then this, of course, sparked heaps of new divergent points. The butterfly effect in action. And even if some of the diverging plot points are a bit too ridiculous to actually take seriously, such as Thanos somehow being convinced that his plan is not the best one, and then joining the Ravagers to help in their little Robin Hood quest, it still kind of fits the feel of the Guardians of the Galaxy part of the MCU, where ridiculous things happen again and again and again. And the key point of divergence here is, of course, the fact that T'Challa is abducted from Earth instead of Peter Quill, and is subsequently adopted into the Ravager family. And at first, I thought this was going to be stupid. How could they possibly mix up these two kids? But then they explained it all so perfectly. That Yondu didn't bother to go and get him himself, but rather sent his goons Taserface and Kraglin. And of course, they instead get drawn to the energy of the vibranium meteorite and assume that the child they find nearby, T'Challa, must be the kid they're looking for. Although it still doesn't explain why Yondu instantly gives up on trying to find Quill completely and doesn't pick him up either. Oh well. And since T'Challa's just a kid who still has his spirit of adventure and desire to help the entire world, as opposed to the more isolationist T'Challa we see during Civil War and the start of Black Panther, he reforms Yondu's Ravager clan and turns them into intergalactic heroes, saving worlds and preventing universal genocide. And I thought this plot point was very fun. Yes, it's a bit silly to imagine T'Challa sitting down with Thanos and engaging in a philosophical debate on how to best address the problems in the universe, and then the two of them walking away as buddies. But it also sort of does work with how T'Challa's portrayed in the MCU. He's the type of character who shapes the world to suit him, and people follow him because he's so charismatic and genuine. I mean, in the main timeline, he brings Wakanda into the world properly, being the first king to end their centuries-long policy of isolation. And he sends out technology through programs and embassies to try and address inequality across the world and improve the lives of all people. The fact that he eventually does this on a universal scale makes sense for how he's portrayed. And yeah, while some of the flow-on effects are a little hard to believe, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief and buy into the story being told, simply because the way we see them interact is too damn funny. But as I said before, unlike the first episode, which kind of needed a really cool storyline for the episode to work properly as the characters were kind of bland, this one didn't. The storyline was good, don't get me wrong, but it was very much playing second fiddle to the character interactions that we get to see that differ from what we know from the normal MCU timeline. The best example of this sort of thing is seeing the interaction between Korath and T'Challa, with Korath being starstruck by T'Challa and begging him to fight him and be allowed to join his Ravager crew, eventually deluding himself into thinking that he's T'Challa's best friend. And I mean, compare this to if Peter Quill is Star-Lord. Korath is a pretty two-dimensional villainous henchman who doesn't really serve all that much of a purpose until he gets killed off by Drax. But this episode breathes new life into the character and lets you see a new side of him when he's around somebody he can actually respect and follow. And he was honestly one of the best parts of the episode, especially his interactions with Thanos and trying to fit in with the crew by making fun of him and calling him Captain Genocide, as well as his shock and disgust that Nebula could potentially be Thanos' daughter. Plus, him acting as the distraction for the heist by getting beaten up by Thanos and his constant quoting of classic Star-Lord made him feel really oddly endearing in a way. And then, this brings us to Thanos, who's been reinvented almost completely for this episode, with T'Challa talking him down from his genocidal plans at some point in the past, and converting him into just another member of his crew who enjoys gardening and talking about how his genocidal plans would have been very efficient. All the while embarrassing his daughter, who also still hates him because he did still abuse her in this timeline before he got converted, with reference being made to her bionic eye. But mostly it feels like she just views him as a cringy dad, which you see when he's at the feast welcoming T'Challa back to Wakanda, and he brags about how his genocidal plans would have been completely fair and efficient, and she just kind of complains that he's embarrassing her. It feels so weird to see this, but after the first couple of lines, you kind of forget he was the big villain for like 10 years of Marvel story, and just accept him as his friend. Although I did not buy him getting beaten down by two members of the Black Order. I mean, I just don't. But I do get why they did that. And speaking of other things I don't buy, Yeah, I'm not sure if I can buy the Collector of all people becoming a galactic kingpin. I mean, there are so many other characters for whom that kind of role would probably fit a whole lot better. And how did he get so buff and strong? And yet another example of character over plot is the whole little sequence of Howard the Duck. He literally serves no purpose to the plot whatsoever, and he's just there to make you laugh at how absurd it is to see T'Challa hanging out with a duck who smokes and drinks. Yeah, they give you the excuse he's showing him the way to the Collector, but he just ends up leading him to a bar instead and expects him to sit down for happy hour drinks. If this scene was removed, the plot would still work just fine. But I don't think they're adding these little details and scenes and characters just to push the plot forward. They seem to do it to make things fun, and I really like the way they've gone about that. I also really enjoyed seeing the changes to Nebula's character, who instead of being a deranged assassin, seems like she'd be right at home in a space noir film as the main character's love interest. It's so odd seeing how a bit less abuse could have prevented her going well and truly off the deep end, and result in her having a lot more friends and close connections. And yet at the same time, it also made me feel sad for this exact reason. Because the Nebula in the main MCU had to suffer so much and miss out on having a better life as we see here. Also, T'Challa and Nebula were not a pairing I expected, but I'll be honest, I'm living for it. And I guess no matter the universe, Star-Lord cannot resist Thanos' daughters. And speaking of other Guardians characters, it was nice to see Drax cameo as a happy bartender with a surviving family. You kind of forget his backstory by the second Guardians film, considering he pretty much becomes a living meme of a character. So I was actually kind of shocked at first, and I was glad that his character was still pretty meme-worthy. On the other hand though, I did find it kind of sad that Peter Quill really did need the Guardians in order to make something of his life. I mean, he's working the closing shift at some remote Dairy Queen, and considering what he'd accomplished in the main timeline, this kind of makes me sad. Also, I guess Ego just completely reshapes the universe in his image since there's nobody to save Peter from him this time. Although I could see T'Challa saving the day somehow. Who knows? And then we came to the ending at Wakanda. And man, this gave me feels. It really sucks that this is going to be the last time we get to see T'Challa. Or at least this version of him played by Chadwick Boseman. But honestly, I think it was a really good send-off. It wasn't too tragic or anything like that. And it really allowed you to just enjoy yourself listening to his performance. Just seeing him walk in and be with his family again was super satisfying, and even though it wasn't the actual actor standing there and was just an animation, it still made you feel something. And then that dedication at the end. God. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the review, and this was just so good. I really can't imagine a more random prompt to go with, but it really paid off. It's such a large divergence from canon that's created so many cool possibilities that we will probably literally never get to see again. So it was super rewarding to watch, even though at times I thought some of the voice acting was a bit stilted. That being said though, those are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Like it? Hate it? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.